Hey guys and welcome to my channel. Today we are doing, what if Naruto had Goku Black sealed inside of him? Blasted through a wormhole with his battle with Goku, Black lands in the Elemental Nations located in Universe 6. A shame that he got sealed into a boy along with a nine-tailed fox and all his power is being transferred to the boy. Oh well, guess he has to teach him how to be a god. With that out of the way, let's begin this what if. Back with Yugo and Suwain. Suwain smirked as he felt his power increase drastically. He clenched and unclenched his hand as he was taking in all this newfound power. He then turned to Yugo. With this power, I'm unstoppable. Suwain cackled. And you will be my first victim of this newfound power. Suwain summoned another water-cutting sword and vanished before Yugo's eyes. He's faster than before. Yugo thought before she saw Suwain appear before her, ready to slash her. Yugo brought her sword up to block but wasn't fast enough as he cut her from her shoulder to the top of her navel. Yugo jumped back and fell to one knee. Time to die. Suwain yelled. He jumped towards Yugo and she closed her eyes, awaiting her death. There was nothing she could do. The wound was too deep and she could barely keep up with him now. She never felt the blow though. She opened her eyes and saw Naruto standing in front of her. He stood, blocking Suwain's water blade with his black key blade. Why the long face, sensei? This chump giving your trouble? Naruto asked in a tone that annoyed her. She knew that he used it all the time to make her. Suwain, however, wasn't annoyed or laughing. He was angry. How can you stop me? I drank the hero water. No one should be able to stand against me. He barked. Naruto dropped back to his smug look as he stared at Suwain, slowly pushing him back as he overpowered him with his key blade. You know, I thought you were gonna be a force to reckon with considering how you were hyping up the hero water, but all I see is man who just got a chakra boost. Naruto taunted. You know what? Naruto jumped away from Suwain and dispersed his key blade. I'm gonna let you drink as much as you want. You claim this will make you powerful and I have yet to see it. Maybe if you drink more then I won't be bored. Naruto waved his hand dismissively. Suwain just glared and growled at him. How dare this upstart genin make fun of him? He was the best jonin in this village for Kami's sake. Fine. Suwain barked. You want a fight? Then you'll get one. Suwain took the bottle out of his pouch. He removed the cork and brought it to his lips. He smirked as he downed what was left of the water. An explosion of chakra surrounded him, blowing away the dirt and grass around them and causing some bugs and animals that weren't prepared to be blown back. This power is unreal. No one can stand in my way. Suwain yelled. Naruto couldn't help but be amazed at the amount of chakra he now had. From what felt to low-tailed beast levels of chakra, he now had mid to high-level tailed beast chakra. Before Naruto could say something, he found a fist buried in his gut. He looked up and spit as he saw Suwain smirking down at him. Naruto was then launched back and collided with the massive tree behind him. The force was so much that he was embedded in the tree. Do you see now, boy? You are no match for me. Suwain yelled before he disappeared again and appeared before Naruto. He grabbed him by his hair and extracted him from the tree only to bury his knee into the young half-scion. Naruto coughed again before he was thrown across the floor and tumbled near the edge of the lake. Suwain walked over to the downed boy with a menacing glare on his face. He reached Naruto and lifted his foot above his head. Naruto went to get on his hands and knees only to be met with a foot to the back of his head, sending him face first to the ground. Suwain proceeded to stomp on his head repeatedly, laughing the whole way. Seems like you take being hard-headed to a new level since it isn't much right now. Suwain cackled. As he was stomping he was stopped as kunai and shuriken were thrown at him. He would have done something if his chakra didn't act as a shield and blocked them from hitting him. Suwain turned and saw Shibuki and Fu glaring at him. Fu's hand was outstretched showing she threw the weapons at him. He looked around and saw his group of ninja laying around, some seemed unconscious while some were a bloody mess. Judging by the blood on both of them, they both killed his entourage. I didn't think you two had it in you to take another man's life. Suwain taunted. Shibuki, the most cowardly shinobi to walk the elemental nations, and Fu, a Jinchuriki that would want to preserve life, considering the way she was treated her entire life. The pair just painted in exhaustion. They realized that in order to live, you have to kill those that wish to harm you and those that you care for. A new voice came. Suwain looked to the side and saw Yugo lifting herself up off the ground, using her sword to push herself up. She then walked over to Fu and Shibuki while holding where he slashed her. He noticed she had bandaged as best she could, but it still looked sloppy considered she was doing it herself. You will all risk your lives for this boy? Suwain laughed as he slammed his foot back down on Naruto's head. I can understand the leaf kunoichi, but you two also? Suwain said, looking at Shibuki and Fu. When he saw they didn't falter, he growled. You are all fools. This is why it is so easy to take advantage of people. If you hold someone hostage, people will hesitate to do something. Suwain angrily yelled. He then turned and kicked Naruto hard in his side, sending him flying to the middle of the lake. His body skipped a few times across the water before he sank below the surface. Suwain smirked at his work before he turned back to the trio. Now, if you wish to die, come at me. Before anyone moved, someone else shouted. Hey, asshole. Suwain turned back to the water to see Naruto crawling out of the water. It looked as if he was climbing on top of the edge of a cliff, but was on water. When he pulled his entire body out, he stood up to his full height. Besides a few scratches, his ripped clothing, and the fact it looked as if he was just punched in the mouth that caused him to bleed a minuscule amount, he was perfectly fine. Your fight is with me. Naruto yelled as he wiped the small amount of blood off his face. I'll admit, that did hurt a little bit. I definitely felt it, but you seriously need to work on your strength. It felt as if you were tickling me. He chuckled dryly. Suwain had it with this boy. He was done being belittled by a genin. Suwain took off towards Naruto, summoning his water-cutting blade, ready to strike him. Kit. Yeah, I know. Just as Suwain was mere inches away with the biggest grin on his face, he saw Naruto flex. The moment Naruto flexed, he was thrown back by a vast amount of power that exploded from the boy. Suwain landed on the water yards away from Naruto. When he looked at him, he couldn't help but be astonished at what he saw. Gone was the black-haired, blue-eyed boy. What stood before him was a boy with spiky yellow hair that stood straight up with seafoam green eyes. A yellow aura surrounding him and what sounded like lighting in said aura. Suwain only knew it was Naruto since he still had his whisker marks, albeit a bit darkened than they were before. What happened to Naruto? Fu questioned. She didn't know Naruto could change his hair like that. He has become what is known as a Super Saiyan. Looking at the confused looks, she began to explain. Something happened during the sealing of the Nine Tails, and something else was sealed in Naruto that night. He now is part of an ancient race that is almost extinct according to his knowledge. They both stared at Naruto in awe. Suwain overheard her explanation but just thought she was spouting words. So what? So you dyed your hair and put in some colored contacts? He foolishly yelled. You didn't get any stronger. I still have way more chakra. Naruto smirked. Technically true considering they couldn't sense his ki. But he didn't need to know that. Then why don't you come and test me then? Naruto taunted. His voice sounded much deeper and held a bit of maliciousness to it. Suwain yelled as he charged at the blonde. Naruto saw Suwain rush at him like he saw him before. In slow motion. He only let Suwain connect those times before because he wanted to test his strength. Much like how Goku and Black fought. No matter how many times he denied it, Kurama would never stop calling them masochists. Just as Suwain was about to strike Naruto, he moved out of the way of his fist with ease, shocking the Jonin. He then felt excruciating pain from his gut. Just how he had his fist buried in Naruto earlier, Naruto returned the favor. though instead of spit coming out of his mouth, a glob of blood escaped his mouth. He then crumbled but was prevented from plunging into the water as Naruto caught him by his hair. "Well, looks like your little power boost is over," Naruto said. Suwayan had no idea what he was talking about until he felt extremely weak. He looked at his hands and saw his skin becoming wrinkled. "I will admit," Naruto started, "that first punch did hurt quite a bit, and if you remained that strong, I would have been very challenged fighting you. Though, you started to lose your power quickly, and now you seem to be losing your life force. I just didn't think you would age too." What he said was true. Suwayan's skin started to wrinkle and his hair became white as his teeth started to fall out. When it was over, Suwayan looked nothing more than an 80-year-old man. "Now, the sane person would let you go since you can barely walk." Suwayan looked hopeful. That was crushed when Naruto had the most sadistic grin he could muster. "But I'm not sane in the slightest." Suwayan had no chance to do anything as he was flung into the air. "Ka me." Suwayan looked back towards the grounds. "Ha me." He saw Naruto cup his hands together and some sort of energy was forming between his hands. Be it his now old age or something else, but he could not sense chakra from the energy Naruto was forming. But he did know it wasn't gonna feel nice. "Ha!" Naruto thrust his hands towards the airborne Suwayan, launching his Kamehameha at him. The moment it touched Suwayan, an explosion that the residents of Waterfall never felt before erupted. There was no trace of Suwayan and there never would be. Naruto descended from his Super Saiyan form and regained his black locks and blue eyes. He made his way over to the trio, two of which stared at him wide-eyed. "What?" Naruto asked. Next day. After explaining that the powers he showed yesterday was from his race, Naruto, Yugao, Shibuki, and Fu all stood outside of the village. They stayed just so Yugao could get patched up and recover from her injuries. "Thank you again, for everything," Shibuki said as he shook Yugao's hand. "No problem. Our mission was to protect you until we left the village," Yugao responded. They both turned to the two teens who were saying their goodbyes. "So, you know how you asked me what my dreams for the future were?" Fu said as she looked at the ground. Naruto curled an eyebrow at her. He figured she had something but didn't want to share as there was plenty of time to talk about it yesterday. "Yeah. So what is your dream, Fu?" Naruto asked. "What was that?" What?" Naruto leaned closer hoping to hear what she was trying to say. His eyes went as wide as saucers when Fu lunged forward and kissed him on the lips. The two adults were shocked at this as much as Naruto was. He soon got over his shock and kissed back, albeit only for a few seconds as she pulled back. "My dream is that I want to be with you. I want to spend my life with you regardless of your girlfriend. If what Yugo said was true, then she wouldn't mind. I want to have a family with you." Naruto stayed silent the entire time, not knowing what to say. "But I know we can never be together since we are from different villages. So I kissed you. I needed some type of closure knowing that we would maybe never see each other again. I'm sorry if I invaded your space and if you don't feel the same and hate me. But I needed to do that for myself." Fu said as tears started to fall as she looked down. She felt a hand on her chin pick her head up. She felt Naruto's hands wipe away her tears. "Fu, I'm not mad. I'm flattered that you feel that way about me. And to be honest, I have feelings for you too. And maybe if we weren't from different villages, we could find out where this would take us." They stared at one another as Naruto still held her face. Their moment was ruined when they heard Shibuki. They turned to the village leader and saw him looking a bit guilty. "I forgot to tell you, Fu. I actually decided that if you wanted to, you could leave with them to the leaf if that is what you desired." Shibuki awkwardly chuckled. Yugo was struggling to not burst into laughter at the atomic blush and stutter the dark-skinned Jinchuriki was going through. Naruto for his part was chuckling a bit while shaking his head. "I just saw how much Naruto made you happy and didn't want you to lose your first real friend," Shibuki explained. Fu seemed to calm down a bit. She then turned to Naruto and Yugo. Would I be accepted in your village? Would I be ostracized like here? Naruto and Yugo looked at each other and just shrugged. Hard to say. Naruto spoke. They don't talk to me and leave me alone mostly because I fight back. Though since the knowledge of my parents came to light, a few of them have been trying to treat me like royalty, but I don't care. Also, Naruto has people who care for him, including me. And once they know you are friends with Naruto, no doubt they care for you too. Yugo said as she walked to Fu. She leaned down to whisper in her ear. And once Naruto's girlfriend, Anko, finds out about your little kiss here, she will be dying to meet you. Fu didn't know whether to be scared or, yes, scared was right. From what Naruto had told her, Anko was a bit sadistic and wanted playthings. Why you won't tell her, will you? Yugo smirked but just shrugged at her as she walked away. So Fu, what are you gonna do? Shibuki asked as he put an arm on her shoulder. Just know, as your older brother, I want you to be happy and will support whatever you pick. Fu looked at Shibuki. She had always seen him as an older brother, and now that he said, she couldn't help but cry in happiness. They hugged while the Leaf Nin watched their little moment of happiness. After a few moments of hugging, they separated. I want to go with them. I love you like a brother, Shibuki, but my heart wants to go where it belongs. Fu said as she glanced back at Naruto. Shibuki just nodded his head at her. Then I will support your decision. I just want you to be happy, so go where you feel is right. She nodded and went back through the underground passage to grab her important things from her home. Minutes later, she emerged from the water surrounding the waterfall. She gave Shibuki a quick hug and stood by Naruto and Yugo. Thank you once again. He shouted as he watched the trio walk away into the forest before he retreated back to the village. After they were a good distance away, Naruto shouted. All right. We are not going all the way there on foot. He yelled. Yugo shook her head as she walked up to Naruto and she put a hand on his shoulder. How else are we gonna get there? Fly? Fu questioned. Sure, she could fly, but that was a special case. Huh? Oh no. Maybe another time when I feel like flying. He said dismissively that Fu looked at him weird. He sounded as if he could fly. Now, if you could mirror my mother here, ow. He exclaimed as Yugo swatted the back of his head. Anyways, just put your hand on my shoulder and you'll see. Fu stared at him questionably, but at the gesture of him and Yugo she complied. So, now what? She asked as she touched his shoulder. Now, Naruto said as he grinned. You hope you didn't have a big breakfast. He brought his index and middle finger to his forehead. What ah? And just like that, they disappeared from the forest in the blink of an eye. Hokage's office. Hiruzen sighed as he read through the document that his secretary had found. Though he couldn't help but giggle perversely while cursing in his head too. Lucky brat. Hiruzen murmured as he put the paper down to rub his temples. He picked up his pipe and took a long drag. He needed to relax, if only for a short while. Mission accomplished, Gramps. Hiruzen jumped at someone yelling in his office that he dropped his pipe and it spilled the tobacco that it held. Ow. What the heck, sensei? Naruto cursed as he rubbed the spot where Yugo swatted him. Don't yell at the Hokage, let alone call him Gramps. She scolded. Yeah. He muttered. Anyways, Gramps. He stepped forward, avoiding another blow from Yugo. We finished that mission and even brought a new resident to Konoha with us. Hiruzen sat up straight and stared at them. He pinched the bridge of his nose as he realized Naruto used what he called instant transmission to appear in his office again. He then looked over to said new resident but couldn't help but chuckle at the swirls in her eyes as she tried to orient herself. She came once Yugo held her still. So it would seem. He spoke for the first time. Now, who might you be? He asked Fu. He knew who she was, it was his job to know who were the current Jinchuriki if any of the other villages planned an attack. Also, he didn't want to be rude, so he let her introduce herself. My name is Fu, Lord Hokage. I'm a genin from the village hidden by a waterfall. I am also like Naruto, in which I hold 7. Fu bowed as she finished introducing herself. She was nervous. She knew villages didn't take kindly to other Jinchuriki visiting their villages, and she was hoping Hiruzen was as kind as Naruto described him. Hiruzen just smiled warmly at her. Nice to meet you, young Fu. Now, why is it that you have decided to join my village? Well, you see. Fu blushed up a storm as she looked at Naruto quickly. Hiruzen, judging by the slight shaking of Yugo indicating she was hiding her giggling and Naruto rubbing the bridge of his nose as if knowing trouble was to come. He realized why she came to the village. He smiled at her. Fear not. I have nothing against you and your decision. He said while inwardly he was saying, that damn brat. First Anko, then her, and that paper. Curse him. Now, would you like to give me a mission brief about what happened? He addressed Yugo, who straightened herself and began to tell what happened. From the beginning to the very end, even the kiss Fu and Naruto shared much to the mint-haired girl's embarrassment. Hiruzen nodded and thanked Yugo for her explanation. I'd say this went from a C rank to a high A rank, maybe S rank mission. I will sort the details out later, but taking on 20 or so missing mean all B rank or higher in the bingo books, with multiple being A rank jonin. Looks like it will be an S rank. He said, much to the satisfaction of Naruto at the chance of getting paid an S rank mission. Now, I want to know about you, Fu. Fu looked at her new leader. What is it you wish to do? You were a genin in Waterfall and could grant you that rank here, but I want to know what your decision is. Fu looked at Naruto and Yugo. They just shrugged and gave her the go-ahead to do what she wants. I want to be a civilian. Fu said, much to Hiruzen's surprise. I don't want to fight for my life day in and day out. I know being a Jinchuriki is going to cause problems with that, but I will train in my own time so I won't be a burden on anyone. I just want to live a normal life as much as I can. Fu said. She didn't want to fight and kill people if her life didn't depend on it. Hiruzen thought it over for a moment. He looked at her and knew that she lived a life much like Naruto, with people hating her very existence and being alone for nearly her whole life. Granted. I will allow you to be free of ninja duties and live out the rest of your days as a civilian. Hiruzen said as Fu smiled. Though you do need a place of your own, but for now, where will you be staying? With us. Naruto spoke. We have an extra bedroom since Anko and I share the same room, so she can have the spare. Hiruzen nodded at that. Great. Naruto said. Now, let's go get you settled in, Fu. Naruto made his way towards the door, but Hiruzen's voice stopped him. Actually, there is a paper here that requires your attention. Hiruzen said as he grabbed the paper. It actually concerns all of you with the current way things have transpired now. That made them raise their eyebrows. All of them? Yugo stepped forward and reached for the paper. Hiruzen handed it to her. Yugo read it, and that was the last straw. She broke down and collapsed to the floor in laughter. If someone from Umbu was to see their former, stoic and serious, captain rolling on the ground laughing, they would have thought they were in a genjutsu. What's so funny? Naruto shouted over his sensei's laughter. Well, you see, Naruto. Minato, your father and the 4th Hokage, had a strained relationship with Rock Village and the Tsuchikage. Now Minato held no hate for them and Owanoki the same for us. They understood that death happens in war, but their people held grudges. Hiruzen explained. They wanted to get past this whole ordeal, so they came up with a solution that would bring the two villages together and end the hate their villages had against each other. Naruto could feel a sense of dread coming. He heard that in way too many shows and books. That would bring the two places together and end their grudges and hate. Your father and the Tsuchikage signed an arranged marriage contract between Minato's eldest child and the Tsuchikage's eldest grandchild. Silence filled the room as Naruto and Fu took in the information. What? This is the list of ages for all the main characters. Naruto, 13. Fu, 13. Kuratsuchi, 15. Temari, 15. Anko, 18. Yugao, 22. Rookie teams, 13. Team Guy, 14. Now with the story. Chapter 4, Exams Part 1. Naruto took a breath as he stood in the middle of the clearing in the Forest of Death. His eyes closed as he concentrated on the trees surrounding the clearing. He moved his head to the side as a ki blast barely missed him from behind. He leaned back to avoid another one that came from in front of him. He turned sideways as two more came at him from opposite sides. He threw his hand up to catch a punch aimed at his head. He then blocked a kick at his midsection with his forearm. He let go of the fist he caught and jumped back as a leg crashed and destroyed the ground he was previously standing. Naruto started to block and avoid various punches from multiple angles as a barrage of fists and kicks were thrown at him. He started to throw back his own punches and kicks, his connecting. As each one landed, a poof sounded off, giving away that a shadow clone was dispelled. If he was to open his eyes, he would see they were in their Super Saiyan state. The clones jumped back and launched a series of blasts at Naruto, covering the area in smoke. When the smoke cleared, Naruto stood in a barrier that kept him unscathed from the attacks. The clones jumped back in and tried to land a blow on him. He continued to block and retaliate. For every block, he would dispel 2 clones. This continued for 5 more minutes until he destroyed 100 clones. As the last clone dispelled, he stood straight again and rolled his shoulders. He opened his eyes as he felt someone jump on his back. "Enjoy the show, Anko?" Naruto smirked as he felt her wrap her arms around his neck and legs around his waist. She kissed and nuzzled into his neck. "Sure did. That display just got me all hot and bothered." She grinded into him as one of her hands made its way under his shirt. "I have a certain itch that needs to be scratched." Naruto turned her around so she was straddling his front, his hands on her rear supporting her. "Then let's go home so I can scratch that itch of yours." Naruto had a smirk as he squeezed her rear, drawing a moan from her. "No, here, now," she said, breathing hard. "I can't wait." Naruto obliged and pressed her back against a tree roughly. Much to her pleasure. Many would not believe it if Naruto told anyone, but contrary to Anko's sadism, she was a total masochist. She still liked to be the dominant one from time to time, but wanted the pleasure of being manhandled. Though, she did say she wanted to rule his harem, which he rolled his eyes at when he heard her say that. "That feels good." Anko moaned as Naruto bit her neck. "Is this what you're gonna do to your fiancée Kuratsuchi? Pin her to a tree during the Chunin exams and make her yours?" Naruto noticed she got more excited as she talked about him getting with women. Naruto shook his head at her antics. She always got turned on when she thought of him sleeping with other women. That reminded him of his fiancée that Hiruzen had told him about. Flashback. "What?" Naruto shouted. "Your father and that Tsuchikage signed a marriage contract. What is so hard to understand?" Hiruzen tried and failed to hold in his laughter at Naruto's expression. Hiruzen looked at Yugo, who was dying of laughter. He was sure if he had witnessed everything she had seen, he would be in the same position. "What the hell do you mean I'm engaged, old man?" Fu's mouth dropped at Naruto calling him old man. She couldn't believe he would disrespect the Hokage like that. This has to be some mistake. Maybe it was forged or something. Hiruzen held up the contract with Minato's signature and then an old document that Minato had signed. Identical. Oh man, this isn't good. I'm so dead. Naruto fell to his knees. If Anko finds out about, the door to the office was kicked open. "You're back in the village and didn't come see your sad and lonely girlfriend? Speak of the devil." Anko. Naruto muttered, surprised. "What are you doing here?" Anko raised an eyebrow at him. She saw he was starting to sweat and was nervous about something. "What's going on here?" she questioned as she narrowed her eyes. "Nothing," he shouted. "Let's go." Naruto grabbed Anko's hand and tried to make her leave, but Yugao opened her mouth. But we haven't finished talking about your fiancé yet. Naruto froze as he felt Anko's hand tighten around his. Fiancé? Anko asked as she looked around and her eyes landed on Fu. Anko wa dash Naruto never finished as Anko was already behind Fu. Ah! Fu yelled as Anko grabbed her and ran her hands across her exposed stomach. You sure know how to pick them, Naru. A caramel beauty too. Anko was inspecting every bit of Fu as she squirmed in her arms. Anko, Hiruzen said. Anko looked at him but never stopped touching Fu. That isn't his fiancé. Anko stopped. Eep. Fu squeaked as Anko squeezed her butt and walked back over to Naruto. That's a shame. Anko said with mock sadness. All the fun we could have had, you still see. Yugao never finished that sentence as Naruto tackled her. They wrestled each other on the floor, Naruto trying to keep her from saying Fu had confessed to him. Naruto froze at the sound of Anko's voice. He knew that voices promised horrible things in the bedroom. He slowly stood up and walked back over to the middle of the room, pinching his nose the entire way there. What did you want to say, Yugao? Anko asked the former Umbu captain. Yugao stood up and dusted her clothes off from her scuffle. What I wanted to say is that you could still have fun with her. Fu blushed as she knew what Yugao was going to say. The caramel beauty confessed her feelings to Naruto and even kissed him. Fu went crimson red and backed away in slight fear as Anko narrowed her eyes. What? Anko asked in a slightly irritated voice. And that's not all. Hiruzen decided to chime in himself. He grabbed the papers that he had shown to Naruto and Yugao. Take a look at these papers here. Anko grabbed them and started to read them. As you can see, Naruto is to be engaged to the Tsuchikige's granddaughter, Kuratsuchi. The residents saw the papers, along with the picture of Kuratsuchi, trembling in Anko's hand. Naruto watched this happen with dread all over his face. Fu saw that and felt confused. Didn't they say Anko wanted Naruto to have a harem? Naruto Anko sang. Why did you try to hide this from me? Ah, well you see, it was dash Naruto didn't get to finish as she grabbed him by the scruff of his shirt and started dragging him out the room. Naruto began to panic and reach for anyone who would help him. Help! Please, don't let her take me with her. Fu went to grab Naruto but Yugao placed a hand on her shoulder. Isn't she gonna hurt him? Fu asked as Naruto's yell echoed throughout the tower. On the contrary, Hiruzen spoke. Fu looked at him curious as to why. You see, about a month ago, a civilian who was just visiting the Hidden Leaf was flirting with Naruto and even suggested following her to her hotel for fun. Hiruzen explained. Naruto declined and later that day Anko found out. She then dragged Naruto home and tied him to the bed and proceeded to put his Uzumaki stamina to the test in bed. Naruto looked like a ghost the next day. Hiruzen had a proud smile on his face that someone so young was blessed like Naruto was. Fu tried to keep the blush from forming on her face but failed when she saw Yugao wiggling her eyebrows at her. And this time will be worse. She just found out that you confessed to Naruto and that he is engaged. Naruto is going to be lucky to be alive tomorrow. Yugao told her. Fu couldn't help but feel bad for Naruto. And slightly jealous of Anko. After everything was said and done, Yugao took Fu back to her apartment since Anko and Naruto would be busy. Fu never got any sleep that night as a result of Yugao's apartment being right next door to Naruto's. Flashback end. Forest of Death. Naruto pulled up his pants and grabbed his gi as Anko pulled up her skirt and put on her signature trench coat. He couldn't help but shake his head at the memory. Anko had drained him completely dry that night. He wasn't able to get out of bed and Anko wasn't in any better condition either. She had lost all feeling in her lower half of her body. He turned and caught Anko as she fell forward. She gave him a sheepish grin. Perhaps I wanted you to be a bit too rough today, hee hee. Naruto just smiled and kissed her forehead before placing her on his back and began to walk out of the forest. Naruto, why are we walking? Naruto turned to look at her but continued walking towards the edge of the forest. Well, I've been avoiding Jiraiya and Tsunade since I came back after our mission in Waterfall, and they are waiting outside the forest right now. Might as well get this over with, otherwise they will just show up at our home. Anko nodded as she rested her chin on his shoulder. It took a few minutes, but they finally made it to the fence, and there they saw the two Sannin on the other side of it. Naruto got closer before he jumped over the fence. "Can I help you too?" Naruto said in a slightly irritated tone. Jiraiya was the first to speak. "Naruto, you have to end the marriage with the Tsuchikide's granddaughter." Naruto raised an eyebrow. That wasn't what he was expecting. He was expecting them to ask for forgiveness and act like what they did never happened. Tsunade spoke next. Menma should be the one marrying his granddaughter. So that was what this was all about. She has a bloodline, and with Menma's Jinchuriki status, their children would be powerhouses. Plus, with the Uzumaki longevity, they would be able to rebuild the Uzumaki clan relatively quickly. Yeah, Jiraiya spoke again. Menma would be better suited to court his granddaughter. Plus, he is the strongest of his generation. Jiraiya finished as Naruto sighed. "Are you two done?" Naruto asked, which the two nodded. "Okay then. Now, do you even know her name?" "Whose name?" It took everything Naruto had not to punch Jiraiya as hard as he could. "That's such a kid's granddaughter." "Do you even know her name?" Naruto asked, a bit irritated. Anko just hugged him a little to try and calm him down. It would be bad if he attacked the two Sannin. Not for him, as she believed he could handle himself, but the village would cause a riot if he attacked two of the strongest shinobi the village had. "Yeah, it's her." "What was her name again, Tsunade?" Jiraiya asked, and Tsunade only shrugged her shoulders. "Kuratsuchi." They looked at him confused. "Her name is Kuratsuchi. She has black hair and pink eyes. She has the lava release bloodline. She just turned 15 this month. She has affinities for earth, fire, and water. She shares her grandfather's stubbornness. She is also the top kunoichi of all the genin in her village. She is highly skilled in taijutsu and kenjutsu. And if it wasn't for the Chunin exams, she would have gotten a field promotion already." Jiraiya and Tsunade were stunned at the information Naruto threw out. "But we didn't have access to the information like you did." Jiraiya attempted to reason. "Then how did you come to know about the marriage contract in the first place?" Naruto questioned. Before they could speak, Naruto continued. "You are supposed to be the best spy master in the elemental nations, but you don't know anything about Kuratsuchi, who is the Tsuchikide's granddaughter? And you're spying on your own village to find out about my marriage? For a spy master, you have your priorities mixed up." Jiraiya still tried to argue. "Listen, Menma has to marry her. This will bring our villages closer and produce a strong heir for the Uzumaki. A child born from a Jinchuriki and a bloodline." Naruto shook his head at the two. "You felt it right?" The Sannin and even Anko looked at him questioningly. "His tailed beast chakra is fading." "How did you know? I can sense it." Naruto cut Tsunade off. "The malicious feeling that the Nine Tails chakra has is getting weaker. He is losing its chakra," he explained. "He is still going to have the same amount of chakra, but he is slowly burning it away. Every time he uses the chakra, he loses it. He will still regain chakra to fill his reserves since that expanded them, but in a few years. He won't hold any of the beast's chakra and it will be gone forever." Naruto took pleasure in seeing them sweat and squirm at him figuring it out. "But you knew that already. And judging by your reactions, you didn't say a word to anyone else, including the Hokage." Naruto went to walk around them, but Jiraiya cut him off. "What are you doing?" Naruto asked in an irritated tone. "We can't let you say a word to anyone. If this was to spread, the village would be under attack." Jiraiya told him. "And you need to drop the marriage contract and let Menma take it." Tsunade stepped in. their child would hold the tailed beast's chakra and we can figure out how to expand it. I'm not going to say anything to the Hokage. Because he already knew. Whatever happens is your fault. Menma obviously isn't strong enough if I was able to outclass him in the graduation exams. Naruto smirked as he saw Jiraiya form a skull. I mean, all that time with 2 Sannin and he had to use the 9 tails chakra and still lost. Great teaching, really. Are you saying we are weak? Jiraiya growled. Do you think you could beat me in a fight? Beat you in a fight? Naruto responded. No, he lied. But I can definitely make sure you wouldn't be able to move without someone helping you for the rest of your life. Before Jiraiya could respond, Naruto brought his index and middle finger to his forehead and disappeared. What the hell was that? Tsunade asked. Forest. Come on and hurry up. The Chunin exams are in a few days and I don't want to miss them. Yelled a feminine voice. Man, is she always like this? Asked another feminine voice. A slight buzzing could be heard coming from her. Yeah, she gets antsy. She's a bit hard-headed just like the old man trailing behind. Said a heavy-set male. They turned around and saw a short old man with a big nose being carried by a man who was also a bit on the heavier side. Though you could see that he had muscles and wasn't just fat. My back. I swear, father, spoke the man. You need to stop putting yourself under so much stress. You youth need to learn to keep my back. He was interrupted as his back cracked again. Take it easy, Kitsuchi. Imagine if people were to see that Tsuchikage in such a state. What they would think. That this old goat should retire. Kitsuchi mumbled. What did you say? Inoki asked. Nothing. Kitsuchi said. He then turned the heavy-set teen and girl who were looking their way. And what Akatsuchi said is right, Suzumabachi. Much like my father here, Kuratsuchi is a bit hard-headed and stubborn. He ignored the grumbling of his father on his back. Kitsuchi then looked to where his daughter was a ways ahead. Oi, Kuratsuchi! He yelled. She stopped walking and turned around. I know you want to see your fiancé, but we are still a couple of days away. Besides, the exams don't start till October 1st. We will still have a few days when we get there, so you can be with him all you want before then. Kuratsuchi's face went red. It's not like that. Besides, I wouldn't marry someone who is weak. If he is, then I won't be marrying him. Treaty be damned. Kuratsuchi yelled back before she continued walking with a red face. Fiancé? Suzumabachi questioned as she looked at Akatsuchi. Right, you just joined our team. Akatsuchi said. You see, that Tsuchikage and the 4th Hokage signed a treaty together. They would no longer wage war and be allies, so to speak. And the way to ensure this was by a marriage. Between the Tsuchikage's eldest grandchild and the Hokage's eldest child. Obviously, if they were both of the same gender, something else would have been worked out. He explained. Suzumabachi was surprised. She thought of all the people in IWA who hated Konoha, that Tsuchikage would be the most spiteful to the village. I thought you hated Konoha though, Lord Tsuchikage? Suzumabachi asked the short man to get a piggyback ride. Inoki peeked his head over his son's shoulder. Do I hate that they killed countless IWA nin? Yes, I do. Suzumabachi went to speak, but Inoki held his hand up. But we in turn killed many Konoha nin too. It is the result of war and something that the older generations understand, especially those who went through war before. A lot of this hatred stems from the ninja who had never experienced war before. They never had to deal with losing a loved one that way. So I made a treaty with the 4th Hokage in hopes of stopping this hatred between our two villages. Suzumabachi nodded in understanding but then turned to Kitsuchi. And you're okay with your daughter marrying someone she doesn't even know, sensei? Kitsuchi just smiled and looked to where his daughter was. No, it doesn't bother me at all. Kuratsuchi is a strong and smart girl. She understands what this treaty means, but the contract also says that both parties must agree or it. So if Kuratsuchi and the boy, Naruto, were to decline the offer, we would remain neutral to each other. Though the contract does state that they must go on at least 3 dates and get to know one another before declining or accepting. Kitsuchi smiled. She is just like her mother. She is a smart girl, she will make the right decision and I'll support it no matter what. Suzumabachi nodded and stared ahead once again. If the Tsuchikage could look past his hatred for Konoha, could she look past her hatred for the Aburame? Only time would tell. Desert. Hey Baki-sensei, how long until we are there? Baki turned and looked at the boy who wore a hoodie that resembled a cat and wore war paint. The trip will take a few days, Kankuro. I can see the forest from here. We will make it there by the end of the day and set up camp. Baki told Kankuro. Sounds good to me. The voice of a girl said. Kankuro turned to her. Yeah, we wouldn't want to disturb your beauty sleep, Temari. He said sarcastically. Temari glared at her brother. Excuse me for wanting to relax after walking through a desert. Came Temari's snarky reply. Hopefully the guys in Konoha don't act like you, and if they don't steal my makeup, that would be a plus in my books. Kankuro flushed red. It was only one time. And that was because I ran out of war paint. Be quiet. They all froze at that voice. They turned and saw their red-headed brother Gaara walk past them. They gulped and followed behind him. The trip to Konoha would now be a silent one. A few days later, Naruto could be seen walking the roads of Konoha with Fu by his side. Fu had only been in Konoha for about a week now and Naruto was showing her around. Anko would join in and help when she had time off from preparing the Chunin exams. The fact that this was also a part of their date made Fu have a slight blush the entire time. So, how are you enjoying the village so far? Naruto asked his mint-haired companion. It's really lovely, once you get past the glares of the villagers. Fu had seen the way some of the villagers looked at Naruto and now are after a few days of walking with Naruto. Naruto had explained that even though they now know that he is the son of the fourth and doesn't truly hold any chakra from the 9 tails, they still hold resentment. Some had changed their ways and some even started to try and brown-nose him. Naruto didn't care. They were just mindless sheep going with what the masses wanted or when something benefited them. Good, Naruto responded. And what about our date? Is it good so far? Naruto asked with a hidden smirk. Fu had been gazing at him when she thought he wasn't paying attention. Fu turned away so Naruto couldn't see her face flush. It's really nice. I really enjoy it so far. She turned to face him. Her face slightly less red. It is something I would like to do more, that is, if you want to also. She said shyly at the end. Naruto didn't respond, he just grabbed her hand and intertwined their fingers. She looked at him in surprise and saw him giving her sincere smile. She smiled back and even leaned into his arm. She let out a happy sigh as they continued on their way. They enjoyed their peaceful stroll until they passed by a back road and heard yelling. Let me go, you brute. Just wait until my big bro gets here. He'll beat you to the ground. The couple stopped in their tracks for deadpanned. Konohamaru? Naruto pinched the bridge of his nose and sighed. Let's go before the runt causes an international crisis. Naruto and Fu made their way to where a group of people were standing and the source of the shouting. They saw Team 7, minus Sasuke, who thought he was stealthy as he hid in a tree nearby. They also saw the Konohamaru Corps, as they liked to be called. They also saw Ninja from the Sand Village. A beautiful blonde girl caught Naruto's interest, and judging by the way she was staring at him, he caught her interest as well. Then was the boy who wore a sweater that resembled a cat? And was that makeup? And you would have to be brain dead to miss the massive amount of killing intent radiating from the tree that Sasuke was hiding in. The third member of this sand team most likely. Currently, the guy was holding Konohamaru up by the front of his shirt as he struggled to get free. I would suggest you let him go. Naruto spoke up,
causing Konohamaru and Kankuro to look at him.
Naruto! Konohamaru shouted. Kankuro glared at him. Oh yeah? And tell me why I should. I should teach this runt a lesson or two about manners, he said threateningly. Kankuro, let him go. It's not worth it. Temari tried to play peacemaker.
Before anything else could be said, Kankuro felt the cold feel of a kunai pressed against his neck.
This is why you should let him go, Naruto said from behind Kankuro as he held the kunai. Fast,
were the thoughts of everyone present besides Fu, who had seen him use that speed countless times. Also, it wouldn't be wise to beat up the Hokage's grandchild while in his own village, now would it?
Naruto mocked. He smirked as he saw Kankuro immediately drop Konohamaru. Naruto removed his kunai and walked back over to Fu, dragging Konohamaru by his shirt. Menma clenched his fist and glared at Naruto. An action that Sasuke mirrored in his hiding spot in the tree. You can come down from that tree, you know. No need to hide up there anymore. Naruto spoke towards the tree. Sasuke jumped down. How did you know I was up there? Sasuke asked, irritated.
Naruto brushed him off and kept staring at the tree.
I wasn't talking about you. I was talking to Mr. One that was hiding with you. Kankuro and Temari gasped. How did he know? Menma realized what he meant and looked at the tree too.
Fu just tilted her head to the side and thought.
Everyone else was left to wonder what Naruto meant by Mr. One.
They all watched a swirl of sand that shifted in front of Kankuro and Temari. When the sand dissipated, there stood a red-haired teen with the most bloodthirsty grin on his face.
Nice of you to join us, Gaara, Naruto said. You too, Naruto Black Uzumaki, Gaara said.
I see you've done your research, as have I,
Naruto said. So I take it, you guys are here for the Chunin exams then? Gaara just nodded. His siblings were afraid that Gaara might lose control.
They never saw him this deranged before and were scared for their lives.
The Konoha Nin were uneasy at how murderous Gaara looked. Small wisps of sand were flailing at his feet.
Mother wants your blood, Black,
Gaara said. Naruto raised an eyebrow. Mother?
Shikaku was probably making his host insane.
It was the result of a faulty or crappy seal.
He had heard from the third and read that many Jinchuriki went insane as a result of having a poor seal.
Yeah.
Listen, make it through the Chunin exams and I'll give you a fight you'll never forget.
There we can fight without anyone interfering. Naruto waved his hand dismissively at Gaara. Gaara just smiled his manic grin and disappeared in a swirl of sand. Kankuro and Temari let out a breath they didn't know they were holding. Kankuro, Temari, the siblings looked at Naruto. Make sure you treat your brother like an actual brother after these exams.
I have a feeling his look on the world will change after it.
Many people's views will change.
We tried, Temari said in a sad tone. But our father is ruthless and only cares for a powerful weapon.
Naruto nodded his head. He had read all about what the Kazekage had tried.
That man, in simple terms, was a piece of shit.
Forced his wife to give birth early and seal Shikaku into Gaara. Making Gaara a killer when he was only a toddler and making him an outcast.
Shared similar lives, but Naruto had people to help him through it all.
Gaara deserves the same.
Just make sure when the exams are over, be a real older sister.
Someone that he could depend on and confide in.
He is going to have a lot to let loose when it's all over.
Naruto then turned back to his witty self.
The fight I'm going to give him is gonna show him the real world and he's gonna need you to pick him up.
You're confident, aren't ya?
Temari replied with a hand on her hip.
Think you can take on my brother?
He gave her his signature smirk. Oh, I'm very confident in my abilities. I'm more of a monster than he is.
Temari unconsciously licked her lips. Maybe you can show me how much of a monster you are?
Team 7 looked shocked beside Sai, who just wore a fake smile.
Most likely he didn't understand what was going on. Kankuro, on the other hand, was on the edge of losing his mind. His sister was openly flirting in front of him. He didn't know whether he should barf or curl up in a ball and pretend it never happened. Maybe some other time. I still have a date to finish. With that, Naruto grabbed Fu's hand and started to walk away. He briefly stopped by Sai and whispered to him, "Tell Danzo that if he sends any more routine after Fu, I'll deal with him personally." "I have no idea what you mean," Sai froze. Naruto focused his killing intent solely on Sai, and for the first time since he joined Root, Sai felt emotion. Fear. Fear that his life would end in the most painful way possible. Tortured and beaten in ways that made Root seem like daycare. "I understand, Naruto," Sai said in a slightly shaken voice. Naruto walked to the end of the road with Fu, leaving Team 7 shaking in anger and fear while Konohamaru Corps ran off to go do who knows what. Naruto turned to Fu and saw her turn her head away from him. "Did I do something?" Naruto asked. Fu looked at him and puffed out her cheeks. Naruto couldn't say it out loud and risk people hearing, but Fu was the cutest thing in existence right now. "You were flirting with that girl while on a date with me." "I don't know how dates work, but I don't think that is how it is supposed to go," Fu told him. Naruto hugged her and she turned her head away and pouted. "I apologize, Fu. It was just witty banter that she started." Naruto tried to console her. Fu looked at him from the corner of her eye. "Do you think she's beautiful?" Fu asked. "And be honest." "Yes," Naruto responded. "I think she was very beautiful." Naruto wouldn't lie to her or Anko. He would be honest with them as they were to him. "You won't leave me, right?" Her voice sounded scared. "You won't abandon me or Anko if someone more beautiful comes along, right?" So that was what this was about. "I would never abandon you or Anko. Just because she is beautiful doesn't mean she can take me away. And I promise you, as long as I live I will never abandon you too," Naruto said as Fu brought up her arms and hugged him back finally. "How can I make it up to you for making you worry?" she mumbled. "What was that?" Fu fidgeted in his arms for a moment before she spoke again. "Kiss me. You can make it up to me if you kiss me." Her face was atomic at this point. Naruto chuckled. He grabbed her chin and pointed her face up towards his. Fu closed her eyes as she leaned up to kiss him. Naruto leaned down following Fu's motions. Fu's heart was beating so fast she thought it would come flying out her chest. She got goosebumps as she felt his breath on her lips. She moved closer to kiss him. Her eyes shot open when she felt him give her nose a kiss. She sputtered as he laughed at her. "Gotta go." Naruto used instant transmission to leave before Fu could berate him. She crossed her arms and huffed in annoyance. "Why that little?" She froze when arms circled her from behind. "Just kidding." Fu turned around only for her eyes to go wide as Naruto planted his lips on her. Her shock ending, she turned in his arms and wrapped her arms around his neck while closing her eyes. Naruto held her by her waist as he deepened the kiss. After a few minutes, they finally ended the kiss in favor of breathing. "Did that make up for it?" Naruto asked as he panted a bit. Fu just nodded, unable to speak in favor of catching her breath. "What do you want to do now?" Naruto asked. Fu leaned into his chest. "Let's go home. I just want a cuddle." Naruto nodded and brought his fingers to his forehead and took them home. Academy. Naruto wandered through the halls of the academy thinking of his time when he was a ninja in training. He scoffed. It was a joke. You only really needed the basics to pass, something kids from clans knew from an early age. The civilians were lucky to pass and let alone stay in the academy long enough. He began his climb to the second level of the academy. He palmed his face when he heard shouting from a group of genin. The test was on the second floor and he clearly only climbed one set of stairs. Naruto reached the final step to the second floor and what he saw made him shake his head.
He saw a kid in a green jumpsuit on the ground with a girl with her hair in two buns helping out the kid in green. He also saw a kid with brown hair and poopyless eyes. Obviously a Hyuga. If memory serves him right, this was last year's Team 9. Rock Lee, Tenten, and Niji Hyuga, the Hyuga prodigy. They must have seen the genjutsu and were probably trying to act weak. It wouldn't work with hardened teams or those who were trying the same thing. Naruto just shook his head and continued to the third floor. As he made it to the third floor, he saw two familiar people waiting for him. Sensei? And Crow? What are you guys doing here? Naruto asked with genuine curiosity. He wasn't expecting to see Yugo and the Yambu that took over for her. I just wanted to see you off before you take the exams. And Crow just wanted to tag along and scope out any potential spies. Yugo said. Though her tone said different and with Naruto giving her a pointed look, she caved. Fine. I know you can take care of yourself, but I still worry. Naruto just hugged her, one which she returned. I know you do. Something I'm grateful for, and my mom would be too. I bet she's smiling down and thanking you for what you've done for me. Naruto said as she rubbed her back. He then smirked. Besides, do you think anyone here is truly a challenge for yours truly? He boasted. Yugo bonked him on the head with her fist softly. Idiot. Naruto just smiled before he looked at Crow. The lone left eye bugged him. Black like coal, but it seemed eerily familiar. Then it clicked. Don't worry about that eye. Crow. I'll make sure he gets what's coming to him. Crow and Yugo stiffened at what Naruto said. Before they could respond, Naruto was already entering the classroom. Naruto put on his usual arrogant smirk as he looked at the Chunin hopefuls. No one really stood out to him that he didn't know already. About 90% of the genin were from Konoha. The newly formed Sound Nin were here. A few teams from Sand including Gaara and his siblings. Oh. Was that the rock team? And why was that girl glaring at him? Naruto moved his head to the side to get a better view from the genin that was blocking his view. He instantly recognized who it was. Kuratsuchi. And boy did she try to burn him with her gaze. Naruto just smirked at her. That got his desired reaction as he saw her eyes catch fire and attempt to come and pummel him only for her teammates to hold her back. Whether she was angry at him for the marriage contract or some other reason he didn't know. Maybe she just wanted to see how strong he was and fought but was forced to wait. He was brought off of his musings when the door slammed open and in walked Team 7. You all better go home now. Because there is no way you can defeat me, Menma Namikaze. Came the boisterous shout of the blonde. Naruto walked away into a corner behind them to avoid being seen. He did see that Sasuke was a bit roughed up though. And judging by Team 9 sneaking in and Niji smirking in their direction. Sasuke must have fought Niji. No, maybe Lee since Niji would have shut down Sasuke's chakra and Naruto felt no disruption in his chakra. Naruto leaned against the wall and relaxed as the rest of the rookie teams approached Team 7 and tried to converse. Sasuke just kept his Uchiha arrogance, Saiya's fake smile, and Menma was being extremely loud and arrogant. Naruto closed his eyes and tried to drown out the noise. Hey, keep it down. You wouldn't want to attract any unwanted attention. Something about that voice made Naruto uneasy. It was too kind and trustworthy. He opened one eye and saw a teen with glasses and white hair approach the rookie teams. And who are you? Menma asked. Name's Kabuto Yakushi. Kabuto introduced. And I have info on any ninja you need. He smiled as he held up cards. Any ninja in these exams, I have info on them, even the Nin from Sound. Naruto would give him credit, he had a better fake smile than Sai, but Naruto could tell that it was fake. This Kabuto guy was way too friendly, even if he was a leaf Nin. I want info on Gaara from Sand, Rock Lee, and Naruto Black. Sasuke said right away. You already know their names, no fun. Kabuto ignored Sasuke's angry stare and looked for the appropriate cards. Naruto noticed the room went quiet and was listening to the whole conversation. They wanted to hear what Kabuto had on who Sasuke said.
Let's see. First is Gaara.
He is on a team with his older brother and sister, which are the children of the third Kazekage.
He has completed 10 D rank missions, 22 crank, 1 B rank, and 1 A rank.
Kabuto said, making the rookies gape in awe except for a select few. Also says here that he has never been touched in battle and is also the Jinchuriki of the One Tails. The people who knew what a Jinchuriki was froze. They turned to look at the redhead and were greeted by him giving a crazy grin at Naruto. Naruto ignored it in favor of focusing on Kabuto.
He has to be planning something.
Saying someone is a Jinchuriki in a place like this is just asking for trouble to happen,
thought Naruto. Next is Rock Lee.
Considered the dead last of his year.
No form of ninjutsu or genjutsu. Very adept in taijutsu.
Completed various D and C rank missions in the year of being a genin.
Kabuto read. Naruto saw Sasuke clench his fist. No doubt he was angry with being beaten by someone who can only use their fists. And last but not least, Naruto Black Uzumaki.
They heard people snicker at his name. Naruto didn't care, he wanted to know what Kabuto knew and see if there was a rat in the village. Let's see, he is eldest twin of his brother Menma Namikaze, who happened to be the children of S-rank Nin Kushina Uzumaki, a mop of red hair twitched in a group of genin, and the fourth Hokage Minato Namikaze.
Those who didn't know looked at Menma and him. He was left behind by his godparents, Jiraiya and Tsunade, in favor of Menma. He is part of a single-person genin squad besides his sensei.
Many gave him predatory gazes.
He scoffed. He wouldn't be easy pickings like they thought he was.
If anyone tried to fight him, he would end them whether they be from the same village or not.
Allies didn't matter in the Chunin exams.
He has completed over 100 D rank missions.
With 10 C, no B or a rank but an S rank.
That S rank included defeating over 24 shinobi all Chunin level and above. That gained some surprised and astonished looks from the room. Temari smirked at him while Kuratsuchi narrowed her eyes.
At least he can hold his own and can fight, came the thoughts of Kuratsuchi.
He also holds part of the 9 tails in him while his brother holds the other part, making them Jinchuriki.
The room paled.
If they were wary because of Gaara before, they were outright scared now.
Naruto closed his eyes as Kabuto walked away after telling them all the info. He needed to deal with Kabuto soon.
He knew more than he should and there was that eerie feeling about him. He also needed to take care of the person leaking all this information. Though, he already had a hunch on who it was.
All right. Shut up and settle down.
They all turned to look at a tall and muscular man who had many scars across the visible parts of his body.
My name is Ibiki Marino.
I will be the proctor for the first stage of the exams.
He yelled out. Come grab a number and take a seat.
One by one, they grabbed a number and found their seat.
As if it was a cruel joke, Naruto was number 9 and in the front row. He shrugged it off and sat down.
He looked forward to seeing Ibiki standing there smirking at him.
Naruto smirked back. Ibiki and Naruto had hung out some since Anko worked in the interrogation and torture department. Ibiki knew Naruto was going to pass to the finals easily. That didn't mean he couldn't give him a hard time. Ibiki saw a girl out of the corner of his eye. His smirk turned to a devilish grin. He watched as the girl glared daggers at Naruto as she sat down. Naruto turned to his side as the person next to him made as much commotion as possible to get his attention. He turned and saw who it was. Hey Koro! He gave a sweet smile to Kuratsuchi as she sat next to him. She blushed at his nickname for her. Don't be giving me nicknames, idiot. I don't like you and there is no way in hell I'll marry you if you're weak. She froze as she realized what she said out loud. She looked and saw everyone looking at her. She put her face in her hands and sat down. You know, Naruto leaned in and whispered to her. I'm not weak in the slightest.
So you don't have to worry about that not being a factor for not marrying me. She instantly forgot about her embarrassment and turned to yell at Naruto, but Ibiki's yelling quieted them down.
Alright. This first part of the exam will be a written part.
To test you on your knowledge of being a shinobi and your critical thinking when put in dire situations.
He said. You will have 10 questions total. 9 at first and I will give you 10th after 2 hours. And remember, no cheating. If you are caught cheating you will be kicked out along with your teammates. So don't cheat. Now, before we begin, any questions? Menma raised his hand. Yes?
Ibiki motioned for him to speak.
Why does he get to take the test if he doesn't have a team? I thought you needed a team to enter? Menma said as he pointed and glared at Naruto.
Naruto rolled his eyes as Ibiki began to explain.
He is part of a team.
A two-man team consisting of him and his sensei. Also, it doesn't say that you must have teammates to enter the Chunin exams, but it is recommended. While you could enter them by yourself, that puts you at a severe disadvantage as it would make you a target for others. Also, I bet a majority of these teams never work together, am I right? He saw various nods through the classroom. Some of the people here want to become a Chunin while their teammates want to wait, or maybe they have become Chunin and they are trying to catch up. So it isn't rare to see genin who were never on a team group up and take the Chunin exams.
Does that answer your question?
He saw Menma and a bunch of the class nod their heads.
Seems they were wondering the same thing. Any more questions? No. Okay then, you may begin. Naruto leaned back and relaxed.
He knew there was a reason other than testing their skills as ninja.
Why would they give you multiple chances to cheat?
In the academy, cheating earned you an automatic fail and even suspension if it continued. But, just to make sure, Naruto was thankful Goku, and by proxy Black, knew this ability at least. He looked at Ibiki, who looked at him with a smirk.
Let us see you pass this test, Naruto. Thought Ibiki. How good are information and gathering skills? Though you can probably answer most of these even if they are Jonin level questions. The last question won't even faze you, so I'm hoping this portion gets to you. Ibiki kept his smirk at Naruto.
What he wasn't expecting was for Naruto to shoot him his patented smirk and flip his paper over, the back facing up. Naruto leaned back and put his hands behind his head and kicked his feet up on the desk.
This garnered some attention from the class. What's up, Naruto? Finished the test already? Ibiki asked. Naruto lazily looked at him before closing his eyes. Yeah. I know all the answers, even the 10th question. I already passed, so this is just a waste of time. Troublesome. I knew it.
Naruto heard Shikamaru in the back before he heard him turn his paper over and heard his head hit the desk.
Ibiki looked at Shikamaru before he looked back at Naruto. Oh? And how would you happen to know the answers, let alone the 10th question? Naruto just pointed to his head. To the genin, they just thought he was stupid and turned back to their own test. Though Ibiki thought differently. It took him a few seconds, but he finally realized it. All the times that Anko took him to interrogation and knew all the info they needed. And all the times when they had a poker game, how Naruto knew when to stay and when to fold. He read his mind. Ibiki went over to his desk, sat down, and slammed his head down. Stupid. Naruto couldn't help but chuckle at Ibiki's self-torment. Pust. Naruto stopped laughing and looked at Karatsuchi. She was looking down at her test, but he could see she was looking at him through the corner of her eyes. Do you really know the answers to the test? Yes. He responded. Don't do the test. She stared at him as if he grew a second head. What? She whispered harshly. Was he insane? Trust me. You don't need to answer any of these. And for the 10th question, do what your gut tells you. Naruto didn't give her a chance to respond as he went back to leaning in his chair and closed his eyes. Karatsuchi bit her lip. Did she trust him?
Sure, she was acting like she hated him, but he seemed to know what he was talking about if he got the proctor to act that way.
She looked to where Akatsuchi and Suzumabachi were sitting.
They were looking back at her, waiting for her to decide what she would do. They would follow since she was captain when their sensei wasn't there. She sighed and nodded her head. They nodded back and followed her lead, which was to turn their papers over and wait. And they did for 2 hours.
Naruto was disturbed from his nap when Ibiki began talking again. Pencils down. No more writing. Now, before I give you the final question, I need to tell you about it.
Naruto drowned him out in favor of thinking of what the next part may be. He knew Anko was the proctor, so it might be in the forest of death.
She didn't say anything as that would give an unfair advantage. He just wanted to know if he would be bored just like this portion did. He looked around as he noticed people walking out of the room. Seemed people weren't confident in their abilities. Weak. Naruto thought. If they quit this early, then they didn't deserve to be a shinobi.
You always take risks being a ninja. You never know what could happen while on a mission. His trip to Waterfall was a great example of this.
Is that everyone? Good. You all pass. A big commotion started as he said that.
Naruto looked around at the teams that remained. The rookie teams, the Sand siblings, Karatsuchi, the Sound, and a few other Konoha teams that he didn't know. So, that is why the people remaining here passed. Ibiki said, catching Naruto's attention again.
Now, before the Sekko dash, a window shattering made Ibiki and the class turned to the window and saw a ball fly through the room.
For kunai landed on the wall and sealed, unfurling a banner that read, "The sexy and taken second proctor, Enko Mitarashi." A smoke bomb went off in front of the banner indicating someone was gonna appear. Once the smoke cleared, they were confused as no one was standing in front of the banner.
"You're early, Anko," Ibiki said as he didn't bother looking at the banner in favor of looking where Naruto was sitting.
The rest of the class followed his gaze and blushed at what they saw.
Anko was sitting on Naruto, straddling him in his chair. Karatsuchi, who was the closest to the pair, was beet red and a sputtering mess. "You have already finished, Ibiki.
Besides, I haven't seen my boyfriend much since we started preparing for the exams, so I'm going to jump him any chance I get,"
Anko retorted. "Be boyfriend?" Karatsuchi stuttered. Anko raised an eyebrow and looked at her and recognized her as Naruto's fiancé. "How is he your boyfriend when he's supposed to be my husband?" Tamari raised an eyebrow. "A girlfriend while he is supposed to get married? Oh, so you already confessed your love and want to marry Naruto, eh?" Anko teased as she leaned towards Karatsuchi.
"But I'll have you know, I'm his first girlfriend and he has a little caramel beauty too. He's building a harem for me to control, so if you want in, you're gonna have to accept that," Anko said while shivering at the prospect of Naruto gaining more girls. The room went wide-eyed and stared at Naruto, who was pinching his nose.
"Did you really have to say that out loud in a room full of teenagers?" Naruto sighed out. "Oopsie, did I say that out loud?" Anko feigned guilt. "But you can forgive your lovely girlfriend, can't you?"
She stared at him with big eyes and bit her bottom lip.
"Anko! The second exam!"
Ibiki yelled at her, trying to save the poor teens in the room.
Hee, right.
She sheepishly rubbed the back of her head. She jumped off Naruto and landed in the front of the class. "Name's Enko Mitarashi and I'll be the proctor for the second exams. Now, meet me at training ground 44 in 30 minutes or be disqualified.
If you don't know where it is, ask someone."
She then threw a smoke bomb on the ground that filled the whole classroom. When the smoke cleared, Anko and Naruto were nowhere to be seen.
Outside the forest of death,
Naruto was sitting on one of the outposts outside of the forest with Anko sitting in his lap. She was currently eating some dango as she kicked her legs over the edge as she leaned back into Naruto's chest.
5 minutes left, Anko said as she looked at the genin who had already arrived there. So far about half of the teams that passed the first exam made it.
That was still about 20 teams including himself, which made 61 so far.
Far too many in his opinion.
They waited for the remaining 5 minutes to pass while ignoring the stares of Genin.
Sure, it was maybe weird to see the proctor and Genin in such an intimate position, but they didn't care.
They were in a relationship far before Naruto was an official ninja. Once the 5 minutes were up, Anko stood up and jumped down. Naruto followed her lead but jumped to the back. So all of you that are here right now, you have officially made it to the second part of the exams.
As you can see, only about half of you made it.
They either got lost or were too proud to ask for directions. Anko said, and saw some of them look relieved that they made it. So, now begins the fun part. She pulled out a stack of papers. She looked at Naruto and he instantly appeared next to her. She handed him the stack as she went on to explain the rules. Naruto half listened as he just went around and passed out the papers, which were waivers in fact, as Anko explained. She then went on to explain about the Heaven and Earth scrolls.
Just as Naruto handed the last waiver to a sound kunoichi, he felt an evil aura.
He looked her in the eyes and was able to see past her purple orbs and saw yellow slitted ones.
"Thanks,"
she said with a fake smile.
Naruto just narrowed his eyes at the kunoichi.
She saw this and smirked at him. No words were said, but they knew what they were thinking. Naruto left and took a spot in front of the gate he was assigned.
A buzzer went off and the gates opened.
Naruto floated off the ground and flew towards the tower in the center of the forest. No need to waste time looking for the other teams.
You were truly only safe until you entered the tower.
He could just block the entrance and steal the scroll he needed from any team. He had a Heaven scroll, so all he needed to do was get an Earth scroll. As he was flying through the air, he saw a Konoha team.
What stood out, though, was the familiar white hair.
Naruto smirked as he landed on a tree above him.
Naruto landed on a tree above Kabuto and his team. "So, what exactly is Orochimaru's plan?" said one of the genin on Kabuto's team. Before Kabuto could berate him for talking out loud, Naruto interrupted him. "Seems like I was right.
There was a snake in these exams."
"Well, more than there should be at least." Kabuto and his team looked up to see Naruto jump down from the tree he was on. "Now, you guys wouldn't happen to have an Earth scroll, would ya?" Naruto asked with a hidden smirk. He saw the weaker-looking one of the trio tense. "Listen, Naruto. How about we act like comrades and work together here?
I know the village doesn't like you, but shove it, Kabuto."
Naruto stopped him. "I'm not some idiot that will join you for the sake of revenge. It's petty." Naruto rolled his neck, getting rid of any kinks. "Frankly, I enjoy fighting and it doesn't matter if I join you or stay with Konoha. I will still fight strong people.
But as for you guys," Naruto pointed his index finger and Kabuto saw two beams of light buzz by his head. Kabuto heard two thumps behind him. He turned around and saw his teammates laying on the ground dead. They had a small hole between their eyes.
"You should never turn your back on an opponent."
That was all Kabuto heard before his eyes saw his feet.
Naruto picked up Kabuto's head and sealed it.
It could be sent to a Yamanaka to see what secrets the slimy guy had and who leaked the information. But from what Naruto had read from his mind, Danzo was behind a lot of the problems that happened in the village. For a guy who talked about doing what's best for the village, he was really trying to drag it down.
Naruto shrugged.
He would kill that dinosaur when the time came, but for now, he went and searched for the bodies of the shinobi he just killed.
Perfect. Naruto held up an Earth scroll.
No need to waste any time. Naruto simply floated off the ground and flew straight towards the tower.
Looks like he'll set a new record for passing the second exams. 7 days later. Naruto yawned as he walked towards the room where the preliminaries were gonna be held.
He spent the 7 days just relaxing after he sent Kabuto's head to the Hokage and filled him in on what he knew. Hiruzen was grateful and even paid him for an S-rank mission. When Naruto asked what they were going to do about Orochimaru, he said not to worry and they would work something out.
Naruto was with Anko a few days after when they felt it.
Orochimaru released some of his power and Anko fell on the bed clutching her neck where her curse seal was. Naruto picked her up and sat her on his lap while he hugged her and flowed his chakra into her, easing her pain. His chakra was very calm and soothing, and he was sure it also had some sort of healing ability due to his Uzumaki heritage. He vowed to find a way to remove the curse seal. Anko was able to keep it at bay since she never used it, but whenever Orochimaru was near, it flared up. Naruto was taken out of his thoughts as he walked into the room. He saw the Sand siblings, Kuratsuchi with her team, Guy's team, and the rookies all standing in a line in the center of the room. 5 teams passed all together. He looked up and saw the Jonin senseis standing on the platforms looking down at their teams, Yugo included. In the middle sat Hiruzen and Inoki. Odd. He thought. I thought the Kazekage would have been here too. He shrugged as he took his spot in line. When he did, a Jonin, Heiei, who was currently dating Yugo, jumped down in front of them. Heiei started coughing, talking, and Naruto half listened. He was busy looking at the teams who passed. The Sand siblings looked the cleanest and least tired. They came in the same day as him, though in the afternoon. He knew since he ran into Temari on a few occasions where she tried to flirt with him. But Naruto surely made her blush in every encounter. Next was Kuratsuchi's team. They seemed a little beat up but were in better shape than the other teams besides the Sand team. When he looked at his own village's teams, he was slightly disappointed. They all seemed like they went a few days without sleep and had their clothes ripped up. The worst by far was Team 7. Menmo was roughed up badly and was dirty judging from the brown spots in his blonde hair. Sai wasn't as bad though Naruto could see he was in an intense fight. Naruto could tell he was a real shinobi at how well he was able to hide his fatigue compared to the rest of the teams. Seems like Danzo can do one thing right at least. When he looked at Sasuke, he narrowed his eyes. He was in the same state as Menma, albeit a bit worse. Naruto guessed it had to do with the new addition to his body, the curse seal on his neck. Please go up and wait with your sensei until your name is called. But the first match will be, Heiei said, gaining Naruto's attention. He looked to where Heiei was looking and saw a computer with names spinning. It spun for a few more seconds before it stopped. Hinata Hyuga versus Neji Hyuga. Hinata and Neji, please stay. The rest please head up and wait. They all left except for Hinata and Neji. Naruto found his way to Yugo and leaned lazily on the guardrail. Glad you made it, Naruto. He heard her say. He smirked. I told you had nothing to worry about, Mom. Naruto waited for her to bonk him on the head like she usually did when he called her Mom. Instead, he felt a hand ruffling his hair. He turned and saw her looking at him. She didn't say anything but he still heard it. Yes, I am your mom and you are my son, that I love very much. Naruto dropped his smirk. He stared at her and gave her one of his genuine smiles. She smiled back. Naruto mouthed a thank you before he dropped it and went back to his smirk and looked at the matches. The first fight between Hinata and Neji went pretty much as expected, though Hinata did fight more than he thought she would. When she wouldn't give up despite not being able to lift her arms, Neji went in for a final attack that would no doubt kill her. Before the blow could land, multiple Jonin jumped in and stopped him from striking Hinata. Hinata collapsed and was carried off to be treated for her injuries. Naruto half paid attention to the rest of the fights. The next fight was Akatsuchi against Choji. It was over fairly quickly. Choji wasn't cut out to fight yet. He was still soft and Akatsuchi took advantage of that and attacked the moment the fight started. Next was Shikamaru and Kankuro. Naruto had to admit, for the laziest bum in the village, Shikamaru was perhaps the smartest in the village. He knew that Kankuro was actually a puppet and the actual Kankuro was on its back. Shikamaru caught the puppet in his shadow jutsu and drew a kunai, placing it behind his back, which the puppet mirrored. Which prompted the puppet holding the kunai against Kankuro's neck. Kankuro gave up, prompting Shikamaru to win. Then it was Sasuke against Kuratsuchi's other teammate, Suzumabachi. That fight was well fought and she used bugs like Shino did.
But Sasuke couldn't let his pride slide and used the curse seal even if he was told not to.
Naruto knew he was told the consequences considering Kakashi had put his porn away when Sasuke used the seal. Sasuke ended up knocking Suzumabachi unconscious and he would have gone to attack while she was down if it wasn't for him to yell in pain as the seal pulsed. Kakashi's body flickered to Sasuke, then body flickered out of the room.
No doubt to keep things under wraps. Next was Temari against Shino. It was one-sided the whole way.
Temari used her affinity for wind to keep Shino's bugs at a distance.
Temari won when Shino gave up saying he couldn't win. Naruto just shook his head. Sure, it was fine knowing and using clan jutsu, but this was ridiculous. Did they not know any other jutsu besides what their bloodlines provided? Then came Tenten against Ino. Most disappointing match ever. Tenten just kept throwing kunai while Ino dodged the entire time. She had no counter and Tenten went in and just overpowered her in taijutsu. Ino was knocked unconscious with one good hit to the head. Naruto looked at the computer and perked up at the next fight. Gaara vs Sai. I forfeit, was Sai's immediate reply.
The room just stared at Sai awkwardly as he gave that creepy smile of his.
Hey-8 coughed. Well, on to the next match. The computer spun once again and showed the next match. Menma vs Kiba.
Naruto watched with a bit of interest but was disappointed.
Kiba was too fast for Menma to use Feng over Feng with Akamaru. But he was a bit impressed when Menma used a Rasengan head-on against them, rendering them both unconscious. Menma won, albeit barely. Naruto looked around the room and saw that there was only 3 people left to fight. Lee, Karatsuchi, and himself. And if the look Hiruzen was giving him, there would be 2 fights left. Naruto smirked at him. You're on, old man. Naruto mouthed to him. Naruto looked at the computer to see who he would face first. Karatsuchi versus Naruto. That answered his question. He jumped down only to meet Karatsuchi there already.
He swore she had instant transmission with how fast she moved.
Finally. I get to see how strong you really are and if you're a suitable husband for me.
She pointed at Naruto.
Naruto just kept his cocky smirk. Is that what she is so angry about? Hiruzen said from his spot on the balcony. Anoki just sighed. Yes.
She has been on about making sure Naruto is strong and suitable for a husband.
Oh, Anoki told Hiruzen.
But, you didn't hear me say it, but she has been a bit tsundere since she found out about the engagement.
Her father told me that she talks in her sleep and she talks about Naruto.
Hiruzen let out a chuckle at that.
I do hope you know that Naruto is already in a relationship.
With 2 girls, in fact.
Hiruzen took pleasure in watching Oanoki's jaw hitting the floor. Lucky brat. Oanoki muttered to himself.
Hiruzen nodded in agreement.
He was a lucky brat indeed. So is he building a harem then? Hiruzen nodded. Yes. Though it is mostly through his first girlfriend Anko. See, she likes both teams.
And Naruto, while saying he is only having a harem to please Anko, he secretly wants one too.
Though he wants people that love him for him and vice versa. Oanoki nodded and turned back towards the floor. Begin.
Karatsuchi wasted no time in attacking as she dove after Naruto.
She tried taijutsu but Naruto avoided every strike she made.
She quickly got frustrated as she couldn't land a solid blow. She was one of the best taijutsu users in the village.
And here Naruto was avoiding every blow with ease.
She went through some hand signs.
Lava style, scorching stream rock. Big rocks of lava formed and flew at Naruto. He completely avoided them as they flew at him. Karatsuchi upped the amount but it made no difference. Naruto avoided every last one of them. Stop dodging and fight. She yelled in frustration.
Naruto looked at Hiruzen and he nodded to Naruto.
Naruto returned the nod.
He saw Karatsuchi come in to fight with taijutsu again. She threw a fist at his head, which Naruto avoided, but saw that was her plan as she quickly threw her leg up to kick him.
It was impossible to block. Except for Naruto.
Naruto grabbed her swinging leg by her ankle. Kuratsuchi paused at his inhuman reaction but gasped as Naruto punched her in the gut and time seemed to slow down. She looked up and saw the look in his eyes. She didn't pose a threat to him. Time caught up to her as she flew back from the punch and landed in the wall, leaving an indent. She fell out of the wall to her knees, gasping for air.
It felt like she was hit by the Kage Tower.
She tried to stand, but the pain was too much for her. She stayed on her knees.
I give up. She wheezed out. Winner Naruto Black Uzumaki. Hey-Eight exclaimed.
Katsuchi jumped down to help his daughter. After looking her over, he was amazed. That punch didn't leave a mark or harm her besides rendering her immobile. The skill and strength Naruto needed to do that was unreal.
He looked over to Naruto and saw he was actually looking at Kuratsuchi with a bit of concern.
He silently thanked Naruto before picking up his daughter and taking her back with her team.
Now, since there is an odd number of participants, someone will have to fight again against Rock Lee. Hey-Eight said, looking at the crowd. I'll do it. Naruto said.
I doubt anyone else would want to go again and risk showing any skills that they wish to keep hidden. Hey-Eight nodded and motioned for Lee to come to the floor. He shouted something about youth before he jumped down.
Begin. Hey-Eight shouted once more and Lee disappeared from sight.
Fast were the thoughts of the genin, who had a hard time keeping up with his movements. It was at this point where Sasuke and Kakashi returned. Sasuke immediately activated his Sharingan while Kakashi ignored Guy, who was shouting about youth in his ear. Lee appeared in the air behind Naruto and attempted to kick him. The room thought Lee would land it, but Naruto leaned forward, causing Lee to miss. Lee used the momentum to hammer kick with his other leg, but Naruto jumped forward, avoiding the blow. Lee's foot crashed into the ground, making a small crater.
Lee tried just like Kuratsuchi did, but could not land a single hit. Lee!
Guy shouted from the railings.
Remove your weights. I give you permission. You won't beat him unless you do.
Lee nodded and grabbed the weights on his legs. He grabbed them and threw them off. When they hit the ground, they made a small crater. Naruto marveled at all that weight he just lost. Lee flexed a bit before he took his fighting stance. Naruto stood there and crossed his arms, waiting for Lee to make his move. Lee moved even faster than before to where the newer genin couldn't see him. Lee appeared below Naruto and tried to upwards kick Naruto, but he moved in time. Lee then tried to take him on in taijutsu again, but to no avail.
Lee continued his onslaught for a few minutes with no progress. Lee jumped back, giving up this attack for now. It seems I won't beat you unless I try my best. Lee took a deep breath. Gate of opening. Open.
Lee's body was flushed with energy as his body changed.
Gate of healing. Open. Gate of life. Open. Gate of pain. Open.
Lee's body looked as if it was on fire as energy flowed through his body.
Lee then disappeared once again and even caught Naruto by surprise this time.
Lee kicked Naruto in the back and sent him flying forward. Lee was in front of him and punched him in the gut before kicking him in the air. Lee next to him in the air and hugged him as they shot towards the ground like a rocket.
At the last minute, Lee let go and landed to the side. Naruto crashed and destroyed more than 70% of the floor.
Sasuke and Menma smirked as Naruto was thrown around like a rag doll.
Lee stood off to the side, still in transformation. You know,
came Naruto's voice from the rubble in the ground.
You do pack quite a punch.
Naruto stood up from the ground, and the only indication that he was in a fight was the dirt on his clothes.
Other than that, he didn't have a scratch on him.
Naruto rolled his shoulders, loosening up his stiff points.
I know you can't hold that form for long, so I'll make this quick to show you the difference in our power.
He smirked. The people who never saw it were amazed at what Naruto did. His hair turns from a black to blonde. His blue eyes turned a seafoam green. "Since you went full power, it's only fair I return the favor," came Naruto's voice, but deeper than before, making a few of the women tingle in arousal while the men had an inch of fear. Kakashi took off his headband and watched with his Sharingan to see what Naruto did. He saw no change in chakra, so he was hoping when Naruto moved he would see what happened to him.
"Doesn't matter if you and Sasuke use those eyes of yours," thought Naruto. "You won't see me. Are you ready, Lee?" Naruto cockily asked his opponent. Lee just nodded and took his stance. The next thing Lee knew was pain unlike anything he ever felt. He was lifted off the ground as Naruto punched him in the gut. Nobody saw Naruto move. He was in front of Lee in an instant that not even the Sharingan could track. Naruto removed his fist and quickly did a spin kick that sent Lee flying backwards. Naruto appeared before Lee again and kicked him in the air. Naruto followed and started to beat Lee as he was in the air, as if he was teleporting around him. Hiruzen. Is that? Owanoki said in slight fear.
His son Kitsuchi was wondering the same thing.
His father's technique?
Hiruzen finished for the man.
Owanoki nodded. No.
What you are seeing is pure speed from Naruto.
He has trained for years in improving his speed.
He is undoubtedly the fastest in the village, as you can see.
I can't even see his movements. Owanoki couldn't help but gulp. I hope Kuratsuchi doesn't make the boy mad.
We don't want to repeat what his father did to us. Hiruzen just laughed before he returned to watching the fight. When Lee reached the max height in the air with his back to the ground, Naruto appeared above him and the axe kicked him back to the ground.
Lee landed hard.
The impact caused cracks to appear all over the tower,
inside and out. Naruto fell down next to where Lee lay unconscious.
Naruto descended from his Super Saiyan form as he saw Lee had lost his transformation.
W winner. Naruto Black Uzumaki.
Hey-8 stuttered. He knew Naruto was fast and strong from Yugo, but he didn't think this strong.
Guy jumped down to check on Lee.
After doing a quick checkup, he found that Lee was severely bruised and unconscious. It didn't seem if anything internally was damaged, but he would wait till he got into a hospital.
Naruto just went back to the railing with Yugo. Is that really his strength? Thought Kuratsuchi.
She had stayed to watch Naruto fight again and was left speechless as she saw him fight.
No. He held back.
Temari was having similar thoughts, though her licking her lips showed she was far more interested in Naruto at the moment. Something Anko saw and got a sadistic grin.
If you would direct your attention to the screen, please. Hey-8 said, gaining everyone's attention.
The computer will now show the matches for the finals that will take place in 1 month's time.
The computer started to display information. Round 1. Gaara vs Sasuke Uchiha. Temari vs Tenten. Menma vs Neji. Shikamaru vs Akatsuchi. Round 2. Naruto vs winner of third fight. Winner of second fight versus winner of fourth fight. Winner of first fight versus Naruto. Final round. 3-way free for all. Naruto couldn't help but pinch the bridge of his nose.
Of course the old man would rig it so he would fight twice.
He couldn't complain because he would fight Gaara because there was no way Sasuke could beat him. But still. These are the fights that will take place next month.
You have the freedom to train here in Konoha or your home village, but must return the day of the finals or be disqualified.
Hey-8 said. With that said, the occupants of the room walked out the door and left the forest of death. Next day. What do you mean you're gonna go away for a month? Yelled Anko.
Fu, who was beside her, nodded her head in agreement.
Yugao just sweat dropped at them. Anko, I'm just going into the forest to train for the month. Sure, I won't leave the forest, but you can still visit. Naruto explained.
He didn't know why they were making such a big deal about this.
But who am I gonna sleep with and cuddle at night?
Anko said in frustration.
Naruto shot a glance at Fu, who blushed.
Okay, me and Fook could share a bed, but who's gonna give me a rough pounding when I need it?
Anko. You go berated. Naruto shook his head. It's okay, Anko.
If you need an itch scratched, I'll be in here.
No need to be grumpy. He reasoned. Fine. Anko conceded. But you better make it up to us. Fu nodded along with Anko.
And no tricks like our date.
Fu pointed at him.
You nearly gave me a heart attack.
Naruto just rubbed the back of his head. Well, I should get going. Naruto turned to Yugo and gave her a hug, which she returned. When he released the hug, he was grabbed by Anko and was brought into a deep kiss, which he returned. The kiss lasted a few seconds before they separated.
He had no time to think as he was pulled into another kiss, but to his surprise it was Fu. When they separated, Fu had a massive blush.
I have needs too, Naruto. She whispered.
That I hope you take care of when the exams are over.
Naruto just nodded.
He turned towards the forest and jumped over the gate. He turned around and waved goodbye before he continued to the deeper part of the forest. There was no time to waste. He only had a month to see what new techniques he could make. This was going to be a fun and productive month. Chapter 5, Exam Finals. There was not an empty seat in the entire stadium as the spectators were teeming with excitement. The citizens of Konoha were anxious to see what this year of hopeful genin would show them. The same could also be said for the shinobi of the village, as they had an entire section just for them. They were excited to see the new generation of ninja from not just their home village but the other villages too. They were also excited since this year's exams had the children of the 4th Hokage and Kazekage along with the last Uchiha. Some were bitter at the fact that the Tsuchikage was here but bit their tongue.
Troublesome. Those two idiots aren't here yet. Shikamaru muttered as he stood with the other finalists in the arena. Dara and Temari stood to his right while on his left stood Akatsuchi, Niji, Tenten, and then Menma.
Shikamaru looked around the stadium and saw the Hokage, Kazekage, and Tsuchikage sitting up higher than anyone else in the stadium on their own platform. He continued his gaze and saw the box that held the Jonin senseis of the finalists along with the rest of their teams. He flinched as he heard that Tsuchikage's daughter argue with her father.
Stands. After all he showed in the preliminaries, he isn't going to come to the finals? Kuratsuchi vented to her father.
Kitsuchi sighed as he stared at his daughter. I'm sure he is just running late. And besides, he still has until his match to show up.
Kitsuchi tried to calm his daughter down.
That is how the exams are always done.
If anything, we should worry about the Uchiha not showing up. He is the first match in all of this. Kitsuchi said as he inwardly sulked. I had a few thousand writing on the boy getting annihilated by Gaara.
Kuratsuchi crossed her arms and huffed.
She would listen to her father for now, but if Naruto got disqualified, then as his fiancé, she'd make sure he experienced hell.
A blush crept up on her face as she called herself his fiancé.
Thinking about your soon-to-be husband, Kuro? Came the teasing voice of Suzuma Bachi. Kuratsuchi sputtered as she turned around to face her teammate.
Before she could respond, she was interrupted when she heard two voices in the spectating area near them.
That idiot hasn't shown up yet. When I get my hands on Naruto, I'm gonna torture him. Kuratsuchi looked at the owner and saw a woman with spiked purple hair wearing a trench coat. It was Anko. And judging by the caramel skin girl next to her, that was Naruto's other girlfriend. Anko, calm down.
We visited him while he was training. He said he wouldn't miss his match. He still has the entire first round to show up.
Fu tried to calm down the fuming snake summoner. I know Fu, but he cut us off after the second week.
Who knows how much he's changed?
Anko whined. And especially with those new clothes we gave him.
I bet he fits them real good. She finished with a bit of drool leaking out her mouth. Fu had a blush at the image of him in his new attire and all the muscle he must have gained while training. They were knocked out of their daydreaming when they heard the proctor yell.
Arena floor. Welcome to the final stage of the Cough Cough Chunin exams. Hey 8 coughed out. Can everyone except for Gaara and Sasuke Uchiha proceed to the participants box? With that, the Chunin hopefuls jumped up to the waiting box while Gaara remained where he stood. Hey 8 waited for Sasuke to appear but saw he wasn't anywhere in the stands. He looked up to the Kage box waiting on instructions. Kage box. It seems the last Uchiha has deemed the exams unimportant. The Tsuchikage said. Well, he must be disqualified, Hiruzen. Hiruzen nodded and went to make the announcement, but the Kazekage interrupted him. I say we wait for the boy to show up. We should move his match to the end of the first round and wait for him there. The Kazekage suggested. After all, people would be disappointed at not seeing the last Uchiha perform. The Tsuchikage gave a wary eye to the Kazekage as what he knew from the man, he was always a no-tolerance man. So wanting to wait for someone that wasn't even from his own village made Owanoki skeptical. We cannot do that. There has never been any leniency in past exams and I will not be the first one to do so. Hiruzen responded. He stood up and got the attention of all those in the stadium. Due to Sasuke Uchiha not showing up for his match, he is thereby disqualified and Gaara is the winner of the first match. Hiruzen spoke out with authority. There was cheering in the stands, but the Kages were able to hear the few jeers from the crowd. Hiruzen took his seat as he looked at his fellow Kages. The Tsuchikage nodded his head in acceptance while the Kazekage looked like he was physically shaking. Hiruzen narrowed his eyes. Arena. Sasuke Uchiha is disqualified from the exams. Gaara is the winner. Hey 8 said in between coughs. Gaara had a scowl on his face as he made his way to the waiting box. Will Temari and Tenten please come down to the arena? Both Kunoichis jumped down from the waiting booth and stood on opposite sides of each other. Match 2 of the Chunin exams will now start. Hey 8 yelled to the stadium. Begin! Both girls jumped back from each other, but Tenten was the first to attack as she launched a shuriken at Temari. Temari narrowed her eyes as she grabbed the fan on her back and swatted them away. You'll have to do better than that if you plan on taking me down. Temari yelled out. Tenten kept a neutral face as she reached into her pouch and grabbed more shurikens and kunai. She watched as Temari unfurled her fan partially and revealed a purple circle on it. Tenten launched another barrage of kunai and shurikens at Temari, but it proved useless as Temari blew them all away with her fan. It's useless, your weapons won't work against me. Temari told her. She wanted to draw out all of Tenten's attacks before she launched her own assault. Tenten growled out at her response. I am a weapons master. No way I'll lose to some oversized hand fan. Temari almost yelled out but calmed herself. She just wanted her to act on her emotions rather than her mind. She scanned the field as it was littered in throwing weapons. Man, this girl is definitely a weapons mistress. Temari thought with an internal sweat drop. A glare caught her eye near one of the kunai in the ground. Her eyes widened as she attempted to jump away. It was for naught though as ninja wire wrapped around her body. I knew you were an advanced wind user. Tenten said to the struggling Temari. I had ninja wired tied to the end of every kunai I threw. Tenten held her hands up and showed they were connected to the wire that bound Temari. Now, no hard feelings, but I hope you don't get too fried here. The wire then caught fire from where Tenten held it as it started to engulf the wire rapidly. Temari struggled as she saw the flames rapidly approach her. The flames were inches from touching her skin when she released a powerful wind from her body, cutting the wire in the process. She watched as the fire sizzled out of existence. Tenten was stunned that she was able to cut the ninja wire. It was one of the strongest wires a shinobi can have. I see you're a bit shocked your wire snapped so easily. Temari said as she grabbed her fan. I cut the wire where the fire was, making it snap easy as it was already weakened there. But it is still top of the line wire. Tenten yelled. Well, I'm not known as the best wind user in Suna for nothing, she smirked.
10-10 didn't have time to respond as Temari unfurled her fan fully and launched a powerful wind blast at her. As 10-10 flew backwards, Temari appeared behind her and slammed her fan against 10-10's back. 10-10 coughed out blood as she laid across the top of the Suna Kunoichi's fan.
10-10 is unable to battle. Temari of Suna is the victor.
The crowd erupted in cheers and applause at the show of two very strong Kunoichi. While 10-10 lost, she showed her intelligence with traps and foresight. And Temari, even though she was ensnared and on the losing end, was able to use her skill and head to escape and win.
Temari leapt back into the contestants' box as 10-10 was taken away by a medical team to check her condition. Match 3 will now begin.
Will Niji and Menma please come down here?
Heiichi shouted at the two shinobi in question. Alright.
It's my time to show why I'm the best one here.
Menma yelled as he leaped to the arena floor. Niji followed right after him. They stood across from each other, Niji with a scowl and Menma with an arrogant smirk. Begin! Menma immediately made a dash towards Niji and engaged in a taijutsu battle.
Menma tried to break through his defenses, but Niji showed why the Hyuga were known as the best taijutsu users as he blocked every single strike Menma made.
Menma scowled as he wasn't able to land a hit on the Hyuga prodigy. Stop being a coward and fight me! He yelled in frustration. Niji continued to deflect every strike though he was starting to sweat. Is that how you will talk to the enemy? Ask them to stop protecting yourself? Niji taunted. You are unfit to be a shinobi. You may be the son of the fourth Hokage, but you are weak. Letting your emotions guide you while the fourth was known to always be level-headed. Menma yelled as he jumped away from Niji, a nasty scowl on his face.
He was about to shout until he stopped himself.
He then smirked. You're one to talk. Niji raised an eyebrow wondering where this was going. You are a branch family member, are you not?
Menma said in a taunting tone. Niji's face morphed into a scowl as his fists clenched.
You'll never amount to anything. Anything you do will always be looked down upon because you aren't royalty. Always a servant to those more powerful than you. Menma laughed.
Now, why don't you get on your knees and beg for forgiveness, slave?
Niji saw nothing but red.
His Byakugan flaring to life, he charged at Menma at speeds that caught him by surprise.
Menma was able to block Niji's fist right before it made contact with his face.
The force, however, sent Menma skidding back a good amount of feet.
Who's the one letting their emotions control them now? Menma taunted. Niji just glared at him.
They both then jumped at each other and engaged in another bout of taijutsu, both of them going on the offensive.
When one would strike, the other would dodge.
This continued for a while until Niji was able to land a hit on Menma's shoulder. He jumped back and held his right arm as it hung there limply.
I disabled your arm. You must have learned from those Sannin that the Hyuga have the ability to see chakra pathways in a person along with their tenketsu. I just closed off the ones in your right arm. Niji started with a smug grin. And now, you're in my field of divination. Niji then activated his Byakugan again and jumped at Menma. He held up his left arm in hopes of stopping Niji's attack. 8 trigrams, 64 palms. 2 palms. He hit Menma twice in the chest. 4 palms. 4 more hits to his chest. 8 palms. 16 palms. 32 palms. 64 palm. The last strike hit Menma in the center of his chest, next to his heart, and sent him flying back. You lost, Namikaze. Disdain was heard in Niji's voice. Menma laid on the ground in pain.
It felt as if his entire body was on fire.
I won't lose to someone like you. Menma screamed as began to move on the ground. He rolled over to his stomach.
He then forced himself to his knees as he began to stand up. Niji along with everyone else in the stands stared in shock as Menma fully rose to his feet. All his chakra pathways were shut off, he shouldn't be able to move let alone stand. You think this will keep me down? Niji gasped as he saw Menma's eyes turn red with slits as his whiskers darkened. A red shroud of chakra began to envelope Menla's body. That's it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed this part. If you want more, like this video, hit that notification bell, and maybe even give a comment on your thoughts on the video. With that being said, I'll see you all in the next part.